So, welcome to the Rebuild Procurement podcast, where we dive deep into topics to keep procurement people up to date and ahead of their peers. First things first, subscribe on YouTube or wherever you are right now. Press that click subscribe button. Whatever you see in front of you, click it. On today's episode, we're going to go through a few news topics and then a deep dive at the end. The first thing here, just first things first, if you haven't gotten your contract signed, do it this week. You'll be listening to this on Wednesday. You basically have 2 days left to do something. At the end of the year, it's shutting down. So just be mindful. If it's not your side, it's the other side. But on our topics, up front, Alan, we have a little bit of consolidation. There's some pretty cool graphics. I think you took one, I took another. The Department of Defense, and then also banks. Then we'll go into some consolidation, what that means, what that does. And then on the back end, we have goals and themes. What else could you talk about outside of goals and themes as you enter the end of the year? So, all right, let's get into it. I'm Tom Finn, bringing 15 years on the client side, procurement, finance, category management, and experience in large and small cap orgs.
And I'm Alan Vika, procurement geek on the sell side of the procurement street. I've assembled a team of superhuman procurement professionals doing managed services at a company that we call Summit.
All right, Alan. So the first thing we have on our little docket here, I think we wanted to go. You had pulled some information, some stats, some views on Department of Defense and how just over time things have evolved, right?
Yeah, that's right. I'll pull it up on my screen as we're talking through it here. But a friend sent me an article on that was on kind of what's happened in the Pentagon, what's happened in the Department of Defense in the last 40, 45 or so years, and really kind of the supply base that undergirds the defense of our nation, how it's undergone this radical consolidation. So this is an article on a website called 18 Theses. It's called The Defense Reformation by the CTO, maybe perhaps a little controversial, the Chief Technology Officer of Palantir, which is one of the new breed of defense contractors based out in California. I think it's backed by Peter Thiel and a few others. But this Chief Technology Officer, Shyam, yeah, that's right, Lonsdale. Yep. This is the CTO, Shyam Sankar. And, I think it's a kind of a call to arms, excuse the pun, about kind of how we've reached a spot in the defense industry where there is almost zero innovation and almost all cost and project timeline overruns. And the author talks about how in the 80s, kind of when the build up to the defense spending that happened in the 80s started, there was kind of this flourishing of new suppliers, and there was a large piece of what he called commercial suppliers. So think about Ford Motors and a whole bunch of other companies that their primary business was not defense building, but they had an arm that basically did defense as well. So there was something like, call it 50 or 75 companies that formed 80% of the spend that the Department of Defense had budget for. Then as defense budgets got cut after the fall of the Soviet Union, basically they had this thing called the Last Supper. It's where they invited all the primes in and they said, hey, listen, we don't have any more money, so you guys are going to have to figure out how to be more efficient and more effective. And then the primes basically went away and said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to consolidate the defense sector. So on the left-hand side of this graph, and unfortunately I can't get it all on one page, so I'll scroll through it. But on the left-hand side, these were basically the people who received that letter that said, hey, defense spending's going down. You guys have to figure out how to be more efficient. So this is 50 or 75 different companies. And you could see these guys all existed in 1980. And then kind of beginning largely around the time of the fall of the Soviet Union, we started seeing massive consolidation. So these companies took efficiency not on the shop floor, but they took efficiency basically on the balance sheet. And they said, let's start to combine all our operations. So you could see this is kind of like the family tree, all of these primes that existed in the 80s. Now, fast forward to our days and times, it's Lockheed Martin, it's Boeing, it's RTX, it's Northrop Grumman, and it's General Dynamics. So basically, the big five. And the article and the author are making the point that with this consolidation, so too came basically the death of innovation. And it made me think of a very interesting quote that I love that I heard from Andreessen Horowitz, the venture capital firm. And basically, when Andreessen Horowitz was founded, they're a relatively new VC firm. They basically, one of their founding principles was, we are going to invest in industries where there's a lot of consolidation. And why is that? Because we believe that in industries that are consolidating, innovation dies, and it's ripe, fertile ground to found some new companies. And I think that's basically what that graph, that picture that I just showed, tells the story of. So then the article goes through and kind of hits the facts and talks about how rather than becoming more efficient and effective, basically those big five have become incredibly bloated. They've become incredibly inefficient and ineffective, and I think we've seen that play out in a lot of the news headlines that we've read in the last handful of years. So, I think it's an interesting thing to think about, because it's basically the supply chain of a big company, the Department of Defense. And if there were good category managers there, they would be investing not in the big five, but they'd be investing in the startups. And I think that's kind of the self-serving reason why the CTO of Palantir wrote this. He's like, hey, we're one of those guys. We need to be funding more innovative companies, smaller companies, newer companies, so that we can ensure that we've got a future of innovation and efficiency and effectiveness.
Yeah, and it's kind of with that, kind of what Andreessen and Horowitz were getting to was it Clayton Christensen, Innovator's Dilemma, right?
Yeah.
Essentially, when like big companies get to the point where they a lot of them chase high margins, and then you get stuck. Like, what happens to all the innovation, right? Because you're just kind of hanging out, especially with the government, in that it doesn't necessarily challenge, kind of relies on these companies to innovate for them. So if they're just paying a lot of money, they don't necessarily know what the up and comers are doing, and then those big companies aren't also looking so much at the up and comers; they're kind of just like beating them up, and there's this whole, just to use there's a whole moat around it, right? So the moat being to get qualified as a supplier for the government. And Palantir, I mean, they overcame it big time. Anduril, some of these others, like there is kind of this like movement that was corporate VC backed to enter the market. It wasn't just Andreessen Horowitz, it's like a decent number of other venture capitalists that kind of pushed this along because they saw this ability to, I mean, just think about the margin that's charged by these government contractors. Like that's it's ripe for the picking if you start doing stuff better than others.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. So, yeah, and you pointed out that there's a similar consolidation happening in another industry, in banking. So I'll let you dig into that one a bit.
Yeah. So let me also pull up something. Share my screen now, Alan. I got this from I think it's called the Visual Capitalist. Is the name of this one. So yeah, this is on just the bank consolidation, and the one that's like I think we're most familiar with, most of us are decently familiar with, is just 2008. So let me reshare that. But you don't necessarily always go back and kind of look and see what happened before. It's sharing the same thing. So it's just the same thing over time, where you started off, I mean, just like eyeballing it. It's about 20 banks, or call it even 30 banks. And in the US, there's big banks and there's the small regional banks. And then sometimes small regional banks can be bigger within their own market. So just over time, there's just been this consolidation. And I'm sure if we tracked it back with certain regulations put in place and burdens that are levied upon banks, it makes it easier for the larger bank to consolidate with the smaller bank. Some cases there'll be mergers, and one will just maintain this name, air quotes, merger of equals. but many like JP Morgan Chase probably would be considered, but others it's just the big company swallows up the small company. And then what these things do, what these not only does it lead to less innovation, it leads to less ability to negotiate with them and find a reliable partner. I mean, a lot of us within procurement would call it like that single source, sole source. If you're not able to bid something out or find an alternative, you end up being stuck with what you have, and you end up being, your specifications are to that company, and you always rely on it because it's the only thing that fits with the rest of it. Like if it's in IT or something, I'm kind of just stuck on that architecture. So yeah, within the banks, within around 2008 is kind of when the final consolidation happened, when all those 20 banks ended up being Citi, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo. But I mean, 2008, everyone, or pre 2008 might remember like Wachovia, or I don't know where anyone is, First Chicago. I mean, those things were like a little while back, but there's just so many of these banks over time that have just, they're the only ones you could deal with. They're the ones that just get uh, the loans. They give out the loans, and they work together closely with the government as well. So it ends up being tough to compete because they end up speaking the regulation and being, again, to the specification side, thinking about your company versus the government. They end up getting spec'd on what these companies tell them or what they get lobbied to do. So, yeah, so I think it's just interesting with a little more competition in place, folks able to, move and make the choices with their wallets, things of that nature. That requires those companies or those suppliers to make shifts to adjust to that. And yeah, if you're all just consolidated into one or five, you have no leverage.
Yeah, I like your take on the leverage point. I look at it and I instantly think of the phrase "too big to fail," which is, it's a little tongue in cheek, because basically what it means is no matter how bad these banks get, no matter how bad these defense contractors get, we can't let them fail, because when one fails, the whole system comes down, and that's a spot you don't want to be in. Our friend Nassim Taleb, who wrote the Black Swan, I think he's most famous for writing the Black Swan. He, his famous phrase, and one of his books was about being anti-fragile. So these two pictures, these two graphs that we just showed, are the definition of fragile. To be anti-fragile means that when you encounter difficulty, not only do you not break, you harden, you get stronger. And that's not what these two pictures are showing. So I think that we're in a spot it feels like in the U.S. economy. We're the biggest and strongest in the world. We're being challenged from the outside, but it feels like we got to start running at some of these problems that we've created for ourselves, and it does feel like maybe we are. And maybe as good stewards here on this podcast, we can bang the gong a little bit. We can raise the alarm.
Yeah, I mean, just a perfect example, like a noteworthy example, was when Boeing, they sent the folks up to the International Space Station, and then it kind of broke on the way, and now they got stuck there. And SpaceX, the alternative that kind of forced its way in, we talked about it a few episodes ago, Alan. They're the ones that are going to go up and save them, right? So that's like literally like a life and death scenario, like in front of the world, that the old incumbent failed, and the new guy is coming to save the day.
Yeah,
Right.
that's exactly right. And I think, it's one of the things that we have to hold a funeral for is this phrase, nobody got fired for buying IBM. Nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. It's an old procurement phrase. It basically says, Tom, you're running a sourcing event, and you've got 2-3 small upstart companies competing against IBM and Ernst Young and some bigger companies. And you're looking at instead of thinking about what's best for the business, you might instead be looking at, hey, what's best for Tom? And if I take a chance on one of these upstarts and they fail, that could be not just my bonus, it might be my head as well. So you fall back on what's known and what's comfortable and what you think is the lowest risk, which in reality is probably not only the lowest risk, it might be the highest risk in the bunch.
Yeah, there's at some with some of those companies, you also have to, like, I think about that not often, but like anytime you're kind of challenging the status quo, you just kind of that, it's just such a ingrained motto or whatever it was of the times. But in some cases, when it comes to like the government, a lot of those folks, they have like friendships with people too,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not necessarily corrupt. It's just like it's trusting in some ways as well. Like you trust it because they bailed you out before, they helped you out, they did good work. But deserve a time. Like you do need some to insert some challenge,
Yeah.
which is good. And with any organization, like if you're stuck, if you're single sole sourced, like if you're there, if it's a mine and it's the only mine you could use, that's one thing. But if it's like a company that offers something that others do, that's a different one, right? And it's
Yeah.
worthwhile to check. I've seen big variances and differences in rates checking a company that's been a supplier, say, for like multiple years, and then you check your company's changed, they've changed, and alternatives are way cheaper for the same quality.
Yep.
So
Good
good stuff.
discussion. All right, you want to jump across the fence and go into kind of I think a good topic at year end to
Yes.
discuss. This is kind of the notion of resolutions, goals, themes. Tom, you and I might come at these from slightly different angles.
Yeah. I think I need to get better at them either way. Whatever I'm doing, I need to get better next year.
What, you don't hit all your goals?
I
Come on,
need to get better at setting them.
I'm batting 1,000.
Yeah. I've like the way I look at them is a longer, like just a longer timeline generally. I don't rush to, like, for work, of course, like you got to reactive, you do that. There's certain things you need to be proactive on, those get done. But when it's like bigger life things or bigger ideas over time, like those, sometimes it's not worth it to rush it. But of course, then there's stuff you want to hit within the quarter, within the year, and you do those. But yeah, Alan, what are your thoughts on goals or whatever else
Yeah.
may be?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I'm lucky because I'm somewhat lazy, and in the early part of my career, I really didn't set too many solid goals. I wasn't a big resolution guy. We would go around the dinner table in my house, and we'd all say, "Oh, what's your resolution for the next year?" And we'd come up with a few things, but I was half-hearted and half serious about it. But when I look back, looking in the rearview mirror, is where you kind of can see maybe why that was. So, I think I grew up in a broken family, and I think one of my earliest goals as a kid was, hey, I want to do it better. I want to try and see if I can build a family, keep it together, and kind of like make good kids, build a good marriage. And that was my one goal, and that was kind of like my theme for the better part of 30 years in my life was family. So everything was focused on the family as much as it could be. Obviously, don't go bankrupt was another theme, another goal, but it was a little bit easier to kind of track with.
Keep a
But
positive bank account.
Exactly. Just don't go bankrupt. But I think that it's like that old story that everybody likes to tell about the professor who's standing up at the front of the class, and he's got the glass jar, and he fills it full of the big rocks, and he asks the class, "Hey, is this full?" And rocks are sticking out of the top. Everybody's like, "Yeah, that jar's full." And so then he takes some small pebbles and pours it in there, and the pebbles fill up to near the top. And he says, "Well, is it full now?" And the class is like, now they're onto his game. They're like, I don't know if it's full or not." So he says, "Well, indeed." So he pours the sand in, and the sand fills the cracks and kind of levels out to the top. And he says, "Is it full now?" Everybody says, "Yeah, it looks like it's full now." And then a girl comes up with her thing of bottled water and pours it in, and it kind of filters down through the sand and overflows the top. And he said, "Okay, now I think it's full." So, back to the big rocks. You got to have those big rocks. And I think for me, at least, family was always one of the big rocks. Was the biggest rock. Call it the boulder. So in my early days, I didn't make a lot of goals, and because that was my one big goal. But it's interesting now, sitting at the point where all the kids are gone. My youngest is a freshman in college, so we'll have everybody home for the break this year. But it's kind of quiet around the house. I get a little bit more time to start thinking about, okay, with the second half of my life, what do I want to do now? And I saw an incredibly compelling YouTube video. Maybe we'll put a link of it in the show notes, Brandon. That basically, it's a 7-minute video that makes the case for why resolutions suck. You shouldn't do resolutions because they're too easy to break. Instead, go through an exercise where you, at the beginning of the year, name what your big theme of the year is going to be. And the kind of the mechanics of doing this I found to be just as important as the actual naming of a theme. Sit down and spend 10 or 15 minutes writing out all the things that you'd like to do in the upcoming year. It can be small, it can be large, and then go through a process of kind of prioritizing them, high, medium, low. And as soon as you've done high, medium, low, knock out all the mediums, knock out all the lows, and then look at just the highs. And hopefully you'll only have 2, 3, 4, 5 items on that list. And here's where it gets really hard. Now take your pen and figure out what the number one goal in the year is going to be. Cross out the others. And this is a Charlie Mungerism from Poor Charlie's Almanac. Is basically, it's just as important when you cross out all those things that you're not going to do, to not do them, to physically tell yourself, yeah, I really wanted to work on my golf game this year. I'm not going to do it, because that number one theme is still sitting at the top. And that's what I'm going to focus on this year. So last year I did this exercise for one of the first times, and I dubbed it the year of summit, because my business was about 6 months old and it was growing, and a lot of things that needed to be done, a lot of foundational work that needed to be done. And I named it the year of summit. And it's quite amazing how much focus that gave me throughout the year. When I would think about, should I do this or should I do that? I would sit back and reflect, it's the year of summit. What does that mean? It means I need to do this.
Yeah. And then, like you said, write it down, right? I think like pen to paper or whatever, physical writing, I've read, I don't remember what the statistic is. I'll make it up. It's like 40% better than typing it out.
400% better.
2,000, Alan, 2,000% better than typing it out. But there is like an incremental, like if you were actually writing, you don't have to always do this, but like the physical, that writing, it does connect better with the brain. So I mean, and I would just say for me, that is helpful versus typing. I type more just because it's, every day, but to capture things. But I've found when I write, like things like journaling, which I get on and off of, but like the art of the actual activity of writing is very helpful. And I've seen that goal, like what you walk through with, write it all down, then cut it down essentially to just one. And I mean, I get stressed out thinking about it. Like there's a physical feeling I had, like in a negative way when you would walk through that, but it is helpful, and everyone can kind of get there in one way or another. And it's not to say like if you have family on that list, they're still important, right? But your idea is like, what goal am I going to hit? Huh?
Don't cross out the family.
Yeah,
please, for the sake of the nation.
As you walk through that, so there's I had heard these 4 categories, which I liked. Also, they all have the F's, which is always nice. But from a category standpoint, family, fitness, finance, fun, as 4 different categories of goals. To those that like categorization, I thought the family, fitness, finance, fun was a good one, and it's also a little more memorable given the F's. But yeah, for me, I think the way I'm better reflective during the year, and this isn't necessarily just the whole the big goal, which I'll get to that too. But I think something where it's just like going back and reflecting often is kind of how you can also make adjustments, right? Like no one, for anyone that's had to go through or do annual reviews on people, like if you're doing it all like one big upfront, you don't change, you don't adjust during the year, like, and then you have this end of year conversation. It's like the most disgusting conversation, right? Like you're a horrible manager if you're doing that. And if you're doing that to yourself, you're also a horrible manager of yourself. So you really want to get just that ongoing feedback for yourself to say, how's this going? And then that one thing, if you go that route, like Alan said, if that one thing, you can adjust it, right? Like for you, Alan, it might be, okay, you know what, actually I need to focus a little more on this other area within my bigger goal in order to achieve that larger goal, right? Like it was too big, got to whittle it down to smidge. So, and then one alternative to themes I've heard is seasons. So in some cases, you also have a season of it could be your year, or this might be multiple year thing where like you're looking to grow something. And you can kind of cap it off if you just think like of a season of a show, right? Like it has 12 episodes, 16 episodes. They're doing something, living in New York, and then the next season they're in LA, right?
Yep.
So you could do the same thing for yourself. So if you have a young family, that might be your season where you're a dad, you're a mom. But then there is like the business growth and the, entering the workforce and being an executive, whatever that is. You can view it as like over a multiple span as a season of your life and really use that to focus where you want to be better and do different things.
I like that. That's good. And it also, what you just said made me think of another point that I made with one of my older kids a couple years back when we had a pretty significant life event, a good life event that happened. And he asked me a bunch of questions about, hey, boy, you've been working on that for a long time. How did you bring that to successful completion? And I said to him, son, there's plenty of time in life. You're in your early 20s. I'm in my late 40s at that point in time. And I said, when I was in your shoes, I remember thinking I have to get it all done right now. But what I'll tell you from where I sit right now is life is long. Usually life is long. You got plenty of time. Be patient and just kind of show up every day and make a little bit of a difference every day. And you can achieve these goals. You can achieve these themes. So patience is certainly a part of this. I look forward to looking at my long list that I whittled down last year. I look forward to revisiting it again this year because there's some things on there that I'll probably say, okay, it is the time this year for a golf game. There's lots of time. Patience.
It's a virtue, right?
Yes, patience is a virtue. That's why it's a virtue, because it's hard.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, I think, but it's fun. I think the end of the new year and the beginning of the next year is always an interesting time. So using the end of the year to reflect, clean up the things that you have, enter the new year in a positive way, more like, clean slate if you need that. In some ways it's a continuation, but in some ways you can reset your mind, depending on where you're at. So I think those are important ways from a reflection standpoint, and then a forward looking, just use that time to do so. So whichever way you're going to do
it. I like it. All right. What do you think, Tommy? Is this a wrap?
It's a wrap.
All right. On behalf of your humble hosts here at Rebuild Procurement Podcast, we are the Category Management King, Tommy Finn, and your Plato of Procurement, Alan Veek, proclaiming this a productive week in procurement. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us on the Rebuild Procurement Podcast. Like and subscribe on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on the latest procurement content.
Show me, and you won't hear the word rebuild.